This is a ramp bed that I have been harvesting ramps from for years now. As you can see, it's a typical kind of place where you find ramps. It's a low bottomland hardwood forest. There's a stream not too far over there, right behind that stump. This floods every couple of years. The stream will rise high enough to completely bury this or cover this in water. And my goal here is to harvest these ramps in a sustainable way, in a way that allows me to come back year after year and get more ramps without damaging the population. So I've been harvesting ramps here, 200 pounds or so a year, and the number of ramps is no less than it was when I started. In fact, maybe greater because of some of the things I've been doing. So let's take a look here at what's going on. One of the things you'll notice about ramps is that they always grow in these little circular clusters. There's one there. These clusters come about in one of two ways, or both ways at the same time. One is by the ramps in it cloning themselves by splitting the bulbs, so the ramps divide and generate more ramps. The other is that they'll produce seeds, and the seeds will drop off, and so the seeds will fall right by the parent plant, and you get a lot of little seedlings growing up mixed in with these clusters. Ramps come up around here in a typical year by the end of March, and then generally peak at the end of May, middle of May, the end of May. It's been a very warm spring here, so this is the middle of April, and these ramps are right now peaking. So let's take a closer look at the ramp plant. Most ramps have a reddish base to the leaves, so they'll have generally 2 or 3 leaves coming out. Typical one, usually 3 leaves, and then there's a bulb down below. I'll dig that out later. These come out in early spring, and will generate these 3 leaves, and the 3 leaves will sit there for a month or so and photosynthesize and produce sugars, and the sugars will be stored in the bulb below the surface. And then at some point, and it's actually starting now, typically it starts in May, the leaves will start showing signs of senescence. They'll start to die off. See here? And the leaves will die off, and some of the plants will produce a flower stalk. But by the beginning of July, there's nothing left above the surface. They've completely lived out their life cycle for the year, and now they're dormant again and waiting for next spring. So, how do we go about harvesting these ramps? The first thing is that the first mistake a lot of people make in harvesting ramps is they tend to try to get down in here and just pull them out. You can't pull a ramp out, and we just snap the leaves off. The bulb is too deeply buried, too well attached to the soil for that to work. So you need a shovel. And what I do, and let's find a nice cluster here. So you put down the shovel next to the clump on the ground. This is going to be hard because I'm holding the camera myself. And what you want to do is expose the whole clump. And the thing you want to avoid doing is taking an entire clump and also taking from the edge of the clump. What you want to do is I've got this clump dug up, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to tear it in half. Now the nice thing is these ramps, it's hard to damage the roots. I'll show you in a second what they look like. So I've torn this clump apart, and you can see here's a bunch of ramps in here. I'll pull one out. So that's a small ramp, and those are the roots. The roots tend to come out intact, and these ramps transplant very, very well. So what I'd like to do is get into one of these clumps and kind of break it apart. Now you notice that a lot of these ramps are growing really closely together. They're very packed together, and so they tend not to get very big. What you do is you go through and you pull out one of these clumps and pull out the big ones. So I'm going to pull this one out. You don't take all of a clump, but you want to take the big ones from the middle. So from that clump I pulled out this bunch of ramps. I'm going to set those aside for a minute, and then let's take a look at what we've got. We've got a hole here in the ground. I've got some ramps I dug up. So what you want to do is separate these out and just stick them back in the ground, but do a nice spacing. So rather than having them all crowded together, you space them out nicely and replant them. And what this does is you're not reducing the area that's covered by the ramps, which are giving the ramps that are left a lot more room to grow, and they get really big and happy that way. So I just put this back in. Sometimes you have to go and get a little bit more dirt, but usually just kind of pack it. Doesn't have to look pretty. You'll come back later and these will be all looking fine next spring. So I just fill that back in, pat it down, and now I've harvested a small number of ramps. This, by the way, is a flower stalk left over from last year. That's what the ramps, what the seeds come from. And you can see that a lot of these ramps are also splitting. So the way I clean the ramps in the field is you can see this will be covered by a sheath, a papery sheath, and it's hard to do with one hand while I hold the camera with the other, but if you peel that back, expose the nice ramp below it, and then you can snap those roots off. And those roots can actually produce new plants as well, so I just kind of leave those in the ground nearby. And so I've got two nice smallish ramps, and do that with the rest of them. So now I have a nice cluster of ramps, and I'll just put those in my bucket, and we'll move on. Now when you first move into an area, you're going to find a lot of clusters like this, and you can see here that this is a very densely packed cluster of ramps. I've never harvested this bunch before. You're going to find a lot of clusters like this. This is one of the things that happens when you get the seeds falling down among the older ramps, and you tend to get this really tight pack of ramps. They don't need to grow this closely together. They're fine if they don't. So what I like to do is every year take some of these new clusters that I've never harvested before and just thin them out a bit. And so you're not going to find real big ramps in here. You're going to find a lot of little ones, and you don't even need to harvest them. That's some decent sized ones there. But what I like to do is take some of these tight clusters and pull clumps out like this, and then go transplant them somewhere where there aren't ramps, and not too far away, but there's a little spot up here where there's no ramps. So I'll just go right here. Dig a little hole. Spread these roots out a little bit, give them a little bit of room to grow. And now I've established a new colony of ramps. And I like to do this, create 50 or 100 of these every year. And that's one of the reasons why there's more ramps now than when I started, because I've been transplanting them and helping them spread. Sun's come out. We get around this side. Now, if you are conscientious about thinning and responsibly harvesting the ramps after a few years, you'll start to be rewarded with clusters like this, this is a ramp cluster I harvested the year before last, and I'll show you what you find when we dig these up. So I'm tearing this apart. We're getting some nice big ramps here. This ramp is so here's one. This is getting to be the size of my thumb. This is about as big as ramps get. And sometimes you get them a little bigger, but this is what you start getting after you thin the ramps and let them go for a few years. You get bigger ones. So not only does harvesting them and paying attention to this harvesting them responsibly helps spread them and keep the population nice and healthy, but you also start to be rewarded with large, really healthy looking ramps.